Hello, my name is Matt Ballant. I'm a senior software engineer for McKesson Corporation and a PowerBuilder MVP. In this short demonstration, I'll be showing how to implement inheritance within PowerBuilder. Inheritance allows you to build base classes, which can then be extended to child classes or subclasses and have functionality which differs based on the implementation. An advantage of using inheritance is to make change. When you make a change to the base class, those changes are automatically made to all of the child classes. It also helps you keep your code more consistent and your application's behavior more consistent. PowerBuilder itself supports single inheritance. Depending on the scope, descendant classes have access to the ancestor's properties and scripts. The only thing you can't do in PowerBuilder with inheritance is if the parent class has a visual component, you are not able to remove that visual component from the child class. You can only make it invisible. So let's take a look at an example. I'm running Windows 7, PowerBuilder Classic version 12.5. Bring up my library. And what I've set up here is a few ancestor classes. I have an ancestor class window called WMainAncestor. It has a window, there's a button to close the window, and upon the window I've put a data window which is inherited from my data window ancestor called UODW. Take a quick look at some of the scripts within this window. Well, first of all, I'll look at my instance variables. I've got two, success and failure. These are protected, which means they can only be accessed by descendants of this particular class. I go to my event list. I have a close event, which when triggered closes the window. Prior to close, it triggers the close query event, which allows me to do any checking on the window to prompt the user for saving, those types of functionality, and allows me to prevent the window from closing should there be some issue where the user wants to cancel the close command. I also have an open event. Now, PowerBuilder does not in itself support sealed classes. And a sealed class from the C# world is a class which can't be implemented. So what I've done is I've added a bit of script here in the open event of this window which checks the class name attribute, and if it is equal to WMainAncestor, I inform the user that you can't open this particular object, and then I close. This would be more for a developer's use as they're testing their application in case they inadvertently try to open this ancestor class. And after this quick check, I post an event called postOpen, which is where you normally would do any initialization which is needed for your window. And the postOpen itself doesn't have any script in it. I just put a note here for the developer that they need to implement this in the descendant. Other script I have here on my data window. No explicit script here. It's all contained within the data window ancestor. My button, all this simply does is triggers the close event on the parent. You take a look at the data window ancestor. Its layout itself is fairly simple. It's got one event item error. All I'm doing here is I'm bypassing the error. I'm allowing the incorrect entry to be accepted because I'm checking for this in the item changed event. I have a couple of functions within my data window ancestor. The first one, date valid, is a simple date checking function. Takes a string parameter, checks to see if it's a date. My other function is a modified, UF modified, and this I would call to see if the data window has either been modified or a row's been deleted. It returns a Boolean, and this allows me to check if a user is exiting a window or closing a data window. I can check to see if it's been modified, and if so, I'm going to prompt the user to save it. Very simple here. So to implement inheritance, I want to inherit from my main ancestor class. So go to File, Inherit, go to my pibble that contains my ancestor, and I want to look for Windows. Here's my window, highlight it, click OK. Now I have a new window. Right now everything is exactly the same. So let's extend the ancestor script for the specific functionality in this descendant class. So I'm going to go to my events. I know I'm going to want to extend my post open event. And I can see here that my script icon is blue, indicating there's code in the ancestor, or I should say there is some text within the ancestor script. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's executable code. If I look at my ancestor script, you can see all it is a comment. So there's no actual code that gets executed here. So if I put just a little comment indicator here, that will extend the ancestor into my descendant. Now I'm going to save this window just before we go any further, so I don't risk losing my work. And I'm going to call this window WOO main. I have a script file here from my window. I'm going to pull some of the events off. So within my post open event, I'm going to call the method WFSetTitle to set the title of the window, and I'm going to insert a row in my data window. So I've extended the ancestor post open event. If we take a look at the edit for this script, you'll notice the extend ancestor script is checked. That indicates that this is an extension of the ancestor script. So when this particular event is triggered, first thing Power Builder will do is it'll go into the ancestor, execute any script here. In this case there is no script, and then it jumps to the actual descendant class and then continues execution here. Now I want to extend the function WFSetTitle from the ancestor. So initially I'm just going to return 1 and go to my text file that I have here. Now within functions there is no inheritance acts a little bit different than in events. In an event you can choose to extend the ancestor script and then have the flow to the descendant script. For functions, you either can execute the ancestor script or you can execute the descendant script. You cannot execute both unless you explicitly tell the system to do that. And that's what I'm doing here. This function sets the window title. And what I'm going to do is, if the title contains the words new title in it, I'm going to call the ancestor method, which is indicated by this super pronoun. If the passed in string does not contain the words new title, I'm just going to set the title. I'm going to put those words into the title. So let's save that. Now what I want to do here, for the sake of brevity, is I'm going to import in my script for this window. Now I have all my events, and you can see by the listing, the icons here, half blue, half white, which events have been extended. Same with my function. Instance variables, this particular window doesn't have any of its own. Here's my new layout with my data window object. A couple of buttons here to test some functionality. Let's run our application. Standard customer name entry. Now let's say, for example, I fat finger my date. I put a letter in there, and I go to move off of that field. I get my error checking. Please enter a valid date. Put in a valid date. It's accepted. This ancestor button is going to attempt to invoke or bring up the ancestor window, and the code that I put in there should check for that and prevent it, and that's what it does. So I've made that ancestor class a sealed class using that technique. This title button invokes the title function, changing it from object-oriented window to new title object-oriented window. And that goes back and forth. So based on what's in there currently, if it has new title in there, it executes the ancestor function, and the ancestor function sets the window name to object-oriented window. The descendant code sets it to new title object-oriented window. And my exit functionality here, this is confirming my changes. Do I want to exit because I've made changes to my data window? My modified method will return true, that things have been changed. If I wish to save it. Now, I didn't implement any logic to save it, so yes and no are pretty much the same. Cancel returns you back to the window, and that's invoked whenever you try to close the window. If I say no, it's closed. Now within my descendant, my close click, again, it's only implementing the ancestor functionality, triggers the close event. I go to the close query event. What I've done here is I've overridden the ancestor, and you do that by clicking on Edit and unchecking the Extend Ancestor Script checkbox. I always like to put a comment at the top of the script indicating that I've overridden it. And this is where I do my checking to see, do you want to save the data window changes. And here I'm demonstrating how you would, even though you've overridden the ancestor, you want to execute the ancestor code explicitly. And I'm calling it again using the super pronoun. So I've overridden the ancestor script. I'm executing some checking here, and based on what the user decides to do, I either continue out of this script or I execute my ancestor script. Thank you very much. That's all for today.